Hey friends. So maybe about a week or two ago, I um, was chatting with a friend, and he recommended a like a podcast, a German podcast, where a couple of researchers were being interviewed about their researchers into human um, meaning making. I guess they're kind of philosophical philosophers of a sort, but they conduct experiments and do all kinds of research into how we produce meaning. And no surprise, one of their big, the sort of the central theme of their work is that humans are storytellers. We make meaning through stories. And specifically, we make meaning through narrative. Narrative is the central guiding feature of essentially all human meaning. Now, that doesn't mean that every fact we learn necessarily falls into a narrative, but we can interpret and receive data that is not narrative in form. But when it comes to organizing that data, and when it comes to making meaning out of data, we are inherently bound by narrative. There's a story. We want to be told a story. We want the data to tell us a story. We will receive data more easily if it comes in the form of a story, etc. This is the kind of general thrust of their argument. And so they've done a really. I just bought the woman's book. Her name is Samira El-Wazil, and she has a book that I'm about to read. I'm really curious, and I will undoubtedly be sharing insights with you. But one of the things that really stood out to me, and this is relevant to inner work. It's that the whole process of seeing our own spiritual conditioning and learning how we ourselves work, and it's also very relevant to the process of culture, witnessing how culture evolves, witnessing how cultures make meaning, how groups of people make meaning. Obviously, narrative is central to that. And one of the things that stands out from what they said just in this little 1 hour podcast is, you'd think that stories would be stories that are not, fictional stories. These are narratives that are essentially considered true. We consider these narratives to be the true story of the world, to reflect a true picture of the world. You'd expect those stories to be adopted or rejected on the basis of whether or not they correspond to the facts, to our perception of the facts of what is true. But that turns out not to be the case. What makes us adopt a story as true is whether or not it confirms, whether or not it allows us to experience the emotions that we have a proclivity to experience, that we have an affinity for. So stories and meaning making is being steered by our emotional self, which is a really good thing to be aware of. And if you can maybe already tell that there's something precarious in that, because it also means that they did an experiment where people would either reject facts and or distort facts in order to make the story give them the emotional hit, to fit the kind of emotional mold of what they were looking for. So our emotions are telling us what's true over and above our intellect. And I don't mean in like a deep intuitive sense of like we know something beyond the rational. I mean in the sense of like we will distort the rational in order to make it correspond to what we want to feel, because we want a story to make us feel a certain way. And this was coming up in the context of a discussion about like, for example, conspiracy theorists. You know, if there's a desire to have that sense of being the lone person in the know, the one who really sees the truth underneath all the spin, all the distortion, all the mass brainwashing. There's an emotional proclivity for that. That's an emotional experience, and it creates a gravitational pull towards narratives that are outside the mainstream and that contradict the mainstream. The irony being, oftentimes we're embracing totally conflicting, mutually exclusive narratives almost solely on the basis of the fact that they're alternative to the mainstream narrative. Why would you do that? Well, because it's not about what's true. It's about what does adopting that story as true make me feel? So this notion, we talk a lot. I don't necessarily talk a lot, but there's a growing awareness now among researchers and scholars of the idea of confirmation bias, and confirmation bias basically being we look for elements in reality or in narratives. We look for little nuggets of information that confirm what we already think. We're more likely to see facts or details that confirm what we already believe. And so, in other words, confirmation bias is like our filter. It helps. We tune out aspects of the world, aspects of incoming information that don't really accord with what we already believe, and we gravitate towards this. If you look at social media, that's like social media in a nutshell. It's like it should be called confirmation bias media, because it's literally designed to discover what we think and like, and then feed us more of that. It's like a confirmation bias steroid injection. And what came clear from listening to this podcast, and I can't wait to read the book because I'm sure it goes into even greater detail, but it's that it's not even about the facts we believe. it's about what do we want to feel. It's an emotional confirmation bias. And if so, I think you can tell kind of what how this might tie into spiritual work or inner work, where we're trying to discover what our own conditioning is. We can't grasp deeper realities. We can't get in touch with our own consciousness, with our essence, if we can't see through our conditioning. If our conditioning is strapped to our face and we simply think we are our conditioning, well, we can't, there's not a lot of room to negotiate. But this obviously also has applications, and in fact maybe even more salient applications to kind of cultural and community evolution, because if that's true, then presenting facts as a means of persuasion, it's not that it's totally ineffective, but it's not you're not getting to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is a desire to feel a certain way. And if you can't provide that, then all the facts in the world are very unlikely to make a difference in someone's perspective. So that knowledge that there's this emotional undercurrent and this emotional element at play in our making of meaning is it's huge. And I think, for as someone who really is, I think one of the central pursuits of my life really is kind of inner work. I think inner work is significant for precisely this reason, because it lifts us out of our own conditioning. We get the chance to see, oh, look at me, look at that. I did that same thing 12 times in the last week. Why did I do that? Oh, it gave me this feeling 12 times. I mean, the process of meditation and of objectifying our experience is essential if we're going to be able to sort of mitigate our own emotional gravitation. Because then we all of a sudden find ourselves, relatively rudderless. The only rudder we have is our affinity, is our emotional pull to feel a certain way, to feel certain things, and so we're scanning and filtering everything that comes in on that basis. It's really only through some level of objectivity, through some level of the distinction between consciousness and the rest of consciousness and the world, that we can start to go, oh, yeah, all these patterns, emotions are cyclical patterns. They want to bind up energy in circular cyclical patterns. So it's really only by getting back and seeing that a little bit that we can overcome, hopefully, an emotional confirmation bias. Anyway, I'll tell you more when I read the book. But that was coming through this morning. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate you. Much love. I'll see you tomorrow.